Do you have SIBO and want to learn how to help yourself? The SIBO Success Plan is now available from thesibodoctor.com. In this highly anticipated plan, you'll learn my tried and proven method to treat SIBO, including home treatments, online dispensary guides, diet handouts, and much, much more. Already being treated by a practitioner? No problem. The SIBO Success Plan is designed as a standalone program or to work under the care of a practitioner. Become a SIBO-savvy patient and beat SIBO for good. For more info, go to www.thesibodoctor.com. Welcome back to part 2 of the SIBO Doctor podcast, and let's jump right back into it. One of the things that I do with patients is when they can't, when they say, I'm busy, I'm always busy, but I don't feel necessarily stressed. This is how I am. I usually share my story with them, which is basically, when I was born, for some inexplicable reason, I wouldn't eat for a whole year and I had failure to thrive. And so, and the family story always goes that my mother would have to would sit in front of me and desperately try to get me to eat and pinch me. So I'd open my mouth and just be really right in my face and be really anxious. And so I always say, it's just like you were like a little baby bird that got imprinted by this really very intense experience with the mother. So, and, that somehow has translated into me being a type A personality in terms of I'm go-getter, I always get things done, I do have a lot on my plate. And so it's almost like that's a familiar state with me. And it wasn't until I was in my late 40s that I really knew I needed to change things. And that's when I moved into the country, which is a lot more calming for me. And I have a totally different pace now. And I just like sharing that because I know a lot of people can't identify with this idea that they're stressed, but they can identify with that their nervous system is always on and they're type A. And that it doesn't mean that you did anything wrong. It's just that you somehow got imprinted as a child, So I like that because it makes it more. I'm not like less blamey, it's not like you're too busy, you're taking on too much. It's just like that is how your nervous system is operating. And you just you basically have to understand that and experience yourself in different states so that you understand the difference.
Yeah. When I ask my patients, how often do they feel in the parasympathetic or relaxed state, and they're like, never, like 20% of the day, or I have to have 3 drinks to get there at the end of the day. And I explained to them, this is really a survival instinct. We weren't meant to live under constant duress. And when I explained that our natural birthright is being in the parasympathetic or relaxed state 80, 90, 95% of the time, it really, and explaining that from a physiological standpoint, as opposed to like you need to slow down or you need to be like this. And you know what, this is, like you said, it's been imprinted. There's been some hardwiring that's been happening. But what we now know from this interesting neurological research is that we can change neural connections through these mindfulness practices, through eating more foods with higher fiber and prebiotics, from eating fermented foods, from moving our bodies in a certain way, from cultivating healthy, positive relationships. These are all things that patients and ourselves have control over.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So, in your practice, how do you already mentioned a lot of great little clinical tips, but how do you, what are your favorite programs or, exercises or apps or what tools do you utilize?
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I I try to avoid apps, to be totally honest, because I'm actually trying to get people to detoxify from their digital media. But I have a certain contingent that's just their world and that's how they relate, and it can get them started. So I like Happify. That's a really nice kind of cognitive behavioral reset. So when people's minds are just kind of spinning out, that's a really nice resource to use. There's another one called Headspace, and that's a nice meditation app. And what's great is that you can ask for a 3-minute meditation, a 20-minute meditation. And now they have series. They've got like an insomnia series and a cancer series. And so you can really get specific in what you're accessing from them. And then there's another tool called Inspire. And it looks like a little pebble, and it's on a belt clip, and you clip it to your belt or your pants. And it's actually monitoring your heart rate, the last time you stood up, how deeply you're breathing. And when it notices that you haven't stood up in an hour or you're not taking a deep breath, it just vibrates a little bit on your tummy. And then it has a message on your phone that says, it's time for you to stand up. It's time for you to drink water. And for some of my people who are really disconnected, really, they're so in that busy cycle that they're not even paying attention. My favorite kind of assessment question to ask is, how often do you ignore your bladder when it's full just to get one more email out or one more little thing done? And if they start laughing because I've nailed them, then that's somebody who could use some of these tools where they have an external tool to help them get back into their bodies. Because it's not so much, and this comes from the therapy world or psychotherapy world, but it's not only about learning how that your body needs to be responded to. It's actually about choosing to respond to the needs of your body. So there's two pieces of behavioral change. One is becoming aware of what your body's requiring, but the second part is the key and often missed in a lot of therapeutic situations where we learn actually body responsiveness. So there's this body awareness, body responsiveness, and we need both.
Can you tell me more about that? Like body responsiveness, how do you measure that, and how can people find out more about that? When would you utilize it?
Yeah, I think it's just paying attention to the signals of the body. I think so oftentimes we utilize whatever to override the signals of the body, be it caffeine in the morning or alcohol at night or sugar in the afternoon, or we're kind of just constantly, or like not going to the bathroom when we need to. And I think this is where a lot of people get into trouble, is that they might need to have the urge to stool, but then they ignore it because they aren't going to take care of it, or and then that's kind of this reflex that happens in the body where the body's like, okay, and it just kind of shuts down that migrating motor complex. I think that it's important for people to just simply start paying attention to what's happening in their system. So that's the first thing that I'll teach them, and I will interrupt them pretty frequently during our conversation, especially if there's an emotion that's clear on their face. And I'll just have them, if they're comfortable, they can put their hand on their heart, but they don't have to, and just say, well, what are you noticing in your body right now? Oh, I'm noticing my chest is tight, or that my stomach's flipping a little bit, or there's a pressure in my head. And I'm like, okay, just notice that for a moment. And then they're like, okay. And most of the time that sensation lessens just from becoming aware. So that's a really simple office tool that I'll offer people, and then I'll have them practice, and people come back and they are amazed at what they have been ignoring, and how little they are connected in. And then so kind of step two, and so really step one is just, can you slow down enough to notice, even if you notice that your back is bugging you and it would feel good to stretch or maybe take a walk for 5 minutes and you don't do that, just notice that your back is talking to you. And then kind of part B of that would be teaching them how to respond to the body. And to be totally honest, this is a little bit trickier because there's often a piece of permission that comes in here where people don't feel like they have permission to take care of themselves the way they need to, either because they're busy prioritizing or sacrificing themselves for somebody else, or they feel like they have to perform in a certain way. I hear this a lot from people that work in the corporate setting, is they'll look around and nobody else is taking a break, or everybody else is eating their lunch at their desk, or so there's this kind of competition performance thing that happens of not wanting to, what people say really honestly is indulge in self-care. And I hear a lot of times that people feel like responding to the needs of their body is selfish. And so I spend a lot of time helping people. This is my soapbox moment. I want to reclaim the word self-centered because I think it's the best word ever. Who does it? If you're not at the center of your own world and the wheel is kind of spinning around you, if you're reaching forward to take care of somebody else or pulling back from your life in some way, that's going to be a really wobbly ride. And people can really get that analogy. So I'm like, so we just want to put you in the center of your wheel so everything flows around that smooth. You have more to take care of your kiddo, and you have more to show up for your partner, and you're rocking it at work because you are self-centered and you are not overextending yourself or choosing out of obligation. And so I think that can be really, really helpful to show people that that selfish and self-centered are really two very different things. And I'll also often use the oxygen mask analogy, where if everybody's on the plane and we're doing the safety thing and the flight attendant says to put your oxygen mask on first before you help those around you, because you'd be a puddle on the floor, not able to help anybody if you didn't take care to get yourself oxygen first, that you are so much more valuable and helpful and have so much more to offer your community when your needs are taken care of first. So, and this whole idea of having needs is another tricky thing too. So I talk a lot with my folks about having needs doesn't make you needy, which is a big fear people have. If I start naming what I need, then people aren't going to see me as strong or as independent or as self-sufficient. And that's really important to me for X, Y, and Z reason. And so we have that conversation too around how do we allow ourselves to have the needs that we have.
Really excellent points. Okay, so just getting back to the practicalities of what people can do and, programs, books, shows, that kind of thing. But before then, I lost, what was I going to ask you? You triggered something in me, and now it's sort of, I've got to reclaim that. I don't know where it went.
Maybe it'll float back.
It sort of just drifted by. I think it was like coming back to, really, I like practical tools because, and this idea of what we started the conversation with, which is overwhelm, right? So rather than stress, thinking more about overwhelm and what people can do in the moment when they feel overwhelmed. What do you tell your patients?
Number one always is the breath, because you've always got it with you. You can do it even in the middle of a really tough situation, and it's free. And so something simple is just breathing in or inhaling for the same count as you breathe out. So if you inhale for a count of 4, you exhale for a count of 4. The count doesn't matter. It's just that it's the same time frame on the inhale and the exhale. And because if you think about when you're upset, your breathing is kind of ragged. It's kind of imbalanced, and the inhales don't match the exhales. So when we breathe with a steady state of inhales and exhales, we're actually signaling the brain that we're safe. And so it's an immediate thing that we can do that tells the brain, you know what? I'm okay. Everything's all right here. There's nothing to see here. I'm safe because I notice that my breathing feedback is telling me physiologically that that's what's happening. There's a little bit more complicated breath that I'll sometimes use, but that's always where I start. There's a breath specific for anxiety that's called the 4-7-8 breath. So you would inhale for 4, hold for 7, and then exhale for a count of 8. The trick here is to keep the count the same and not go 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you really so just have people count as quickly as they want, as long as they're keeping the cadence similar.
Right.
And
that
these
actually
are
reminds me of the Buteyko breathing, So Buteyko breathing is, I had a podcast with Mim Beam, for those of you listening. It's a wonderful podcast where she discusses this holding of the breath is really important to build up carbon dioxide, because that's actually the trigger for oxygen release. So this is something to review for those of you who are interested.
I think that's a great idea. Yeah. And I think explaining to your patients the actual basic physiology of why you're having them do this, that it's not just this nicey nice thing that if they have time, they can do it, that this is actually the foundation of everything else that you're going to do together. Because, simply having mindfulness around breathing actually changes your vagal tone. So in some of the research I was doing around, we're talking about low vagal tone. How do we stimulate vagal tone? They're actually going in invasively and electromagnetically stimulating the vagus nerve. I'm like, really? Because you could just do that with the breath. And if people, and I have a couple of people who have a very strong, complex trauma history. And so for some people, it's not safe to come into the body and breathe in that way. And so maybe there's another thing like yoga, where they're actually moving and using the breath in a different way. Maybe they like to sit for meditation. I have some people who that feels like a very big stretch to sit even for 5 or 10 minutes. And so I'll introduce the idea of walking meditation. So you're literally like left foot, right foot, left foot, right foot as somebody's walking, and just give their mind, something else to think about. I'm a big fan of coming up with mantras or things like that. And there's traditional mantras like, you can breathe in and say no, breathe out and say mind. So no mind, no mind. That's a very Zen approach. In the Kundalini tradition, it's so hum. So on the inhale, hum on the exhale. Or I'll just ask people, breathe in, what's something that you want more of in your world, and what's something that you want to let go of. And so you can breathe in peace and breathe out stress, and just say that to yourself. Because a lot of people, it's really helpful to give their mind something to do. Or, if they're teaching meditation, just have them just try to count to 10 breaths. And when they get to 10, start again. And that's actually incredibly challenging to pay attention to 10 breaths in a row. And so these are some of the pieces that you can do. There's so many ways to access this as practitioners too. So for myself, I've been trained in internal family systems, which is a psychotherapeutic model. So I teach people how to be with the different parts of themselves. And so I can really do some of this deeper trauma work with them. That's because that's what I'm interested in. If my husband is like, I don't know how you sit there and talk to the people the way that you do all day long, because I come home and I'm like, guess what happened? And he's like, oh, that sounds like hell on earth. So if you're one of those people that doesn't want to go there, then network with the people in your community who's doing energy work or craniosacral therapy or talk therapy or acupuncture or some of these other modalities that are designed to help reset the nervous system. Bowen therapy is another one that comes to mind. So find out, either learn it yourself or find out who's in your neighborhood and strike up a relationship, and you'll see that it's really, really helpful. And always, always, always nervines and adaptogens are going to be incredibly important physiologically for resetting some of this nervous system and vagal tone stuff as well.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, different minerals, different herbs, lots of support there.
Magnesium.
Yeah, there's some thought that our need for magnesium actually increases tenfold during stress. So if you're constantly in that state and you drink a lot of coffee, which is a diuretic, and you're losing magnesium, it's very easy to get magnesium depleted, just on a side note.
And I would do magnesium glycinate if you're doing it for anxiety or stress or overwhelm, because it's attached to that nice glycine molecule, which is really, it's a very gentle stimulant of the GABA receptor, which is a nice inhibitory or calming neurotransmitter. So that if you're going to do the magnesium, why not attach it to the glycine molecule? And it has less of an impact with that, on the bowels too, which is nice.
Right.
Just
a comment on the breathing. Just a comment on what you were talking with the deep breathing. That's a very common finding when I have the the pleasure of seeing a patient actually in my office, because I do a lot of online and long distance telemedicine. But what I notice a lot when people are very stressed is they have this whole solar plexus that's completely tense. And it comes a lot from this stressful breathing, which is very shallow breathing. And just as a reminder that doing deep breathing is not just good for your nervous system, it is good for your digestive system, also because of the physical act of the diaphragm moving against the transverse colon and massaging the organs of digestion. That is really meant to be a symphony of events there. So practicing deep breathing is just as simple as putting your hand on your belly button and watching it go up and down. And many people they have to actually rethink of how to breathe because they haven't done it in so long that it actually, they have to stop and think of how to do that. So that's just a little reminder of how to, just practicing that type of breathing.
And teaching our kids this stuff too. So it can be fun to put their favorite stuffed animal on their belly and ask them to make the teddy bear go up and down, so that we're teaching them from a young age how to self-regulate and how to breathe. Because a lot of us got this stuff taught out of us, early on. And it's a lot harder to relearn when we're adults. We're much further set in our patterns.
Yes. So just before we wrap up and talk about where people can find you and all of that, just briefly about trauma and your favorite type of work. I mean, it sounds like you do your own work with trauma. I often refer to people that do somatic experiencing, and those of you who haven't heard of that, that's a type of therapy that, the way I understand it, is it's not about reliving the traumatic events. It's about allowing your body to complete the fight or the flight. So being able to actually, because oftentimes trauma is basically a stuck response in the body where the fight or flight wasn't allowed to be completed. And so it's a beautiful type of session that's very gentle, that really aims to discharge the traumatic energy from the body. There are a couple of books out on this. One is called Waking the Tiger. The other is Healing Trauma, both by Peter Levine, who's a researcher in this area. And do you have any comments on that type of therapy, Nicola?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Something like somatic experiencing. Another body-centered therapy is called Hakomi. And so Hakomi can be another therapeutic tool that you can either learn yourself or refer out to. It's primarily therapists that get trained in Hakomi, but I think us naturopaths could use some of that training too. But I think that's great as well. I'm biased towards internal family systems because I think that just does such a nice job of having the body-centered piece and also kind of the reintegration piece. Because I think that's why trauma causes such an issue in our systems. It's kind of like this glitch in the matrix that we keep on getting hooked on because we haven't really just witnessed the burden of that kiddo or of that, younger version of ourselves, even if it's an adult thing. And so by having some sort of practitioner who can just hold space for you to presence, and like Nicola said, you don't have to relive all the details, but you show up for the emotions and help that part of you grieve or get angry or get safe or whatever it needs to be. But and there's, again, you can learn it yourself, or there can be practitioners that you refer to for PNI or NLP. I think I got those acronyms right.
And EFT, what about EFT? I totally forgot about that. I love emotional freedom technique. This is something else
that's the tapping.
Yes, tapping. If you're a patient and you're listening, just even Google EFT. It's just a wonderful right in the moment technique that you can learn to at least take the edge off the charge of whatever it is that you're experiencing, anything from physical to emotional stress that you're experiencing. It's a really wonderful technique that is great to start with. So that's called emotional freedom technique. I almost forgot about that. How could I possibly?
Yeah, no, it's a great one. And I think, we could go on, and, and there's restorative or yin yoga. Yeah. And if your folks or you are not into yoga, that's fine. Anything where your head is below your heart is relaxing to your nervous system. So you can hang out and put your legs up the wall. That's yoga. But it's also really restorative to your nervous system. Or you can just just go ahead and touch your toes and take a few deep breaths in there. That's a really nice nervous system reset. It's something I like to do in between meetings. It kind of gets me just reset. Or even child's pose, where you have your knees together, knees apart, and just rest your forehead on the ground. Any of those things you can do and just take a few breaths. And that is actually restorative to the nervous system. So I think the point here is that there's no shortage of ways at this point to access these programs. Why Zebras Get Ulcers is a great book.
How could you possibly?
For patients. Yeah, it's such a great explanation of stress and what happens. The Peter Levine stuff is great. Bessel van der Kolk is another big name in trauma, and he makes some great books. I'm blanking on his name, the author's name, but he wrote The Chemistry of Calm and the Chemistry of Joy. And so the Chemistry of Joy is about depression. Chemistry of Calm is about anxiety. But he's a resilience-based psychiatrist from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so he has these two books that are great because they talk about nutrition, resilience, mindfulness, and mental health. So they're really great resources for patients as well.
Excellent. Okay, now we really do have to wrap up. So tell us a little bit about your Anxiety Summit and when that's happening.
Sure, yeah.
And also where people can find you if they want to start working with you. And if you do actually Skype appointments and things like that?
I do Zoom, yeah. So I have patients all over the globe that I love to work with because it's really exciting that we're all coming together in our small little global community. So if you're interested in that, you can find more information about me on my practice website, which is Pura, Pura, Vida, Vida, healthcare.com. And then in starting September 24th through October 4th of 2019, I'm offering an online anxiety summit. And for those of you who don't know what a summit is, it just means that I'm getting together with a bunch of experts in the field from all over the globe, including our own Dr. Jacoby. And to talk about these different aspects of anxiety and everything from Lisa Ashuler will be talking about botanical medicine. I've got Sarah Lepisco talking about essential oils. I've got my yoga teacher who's going to make a specific asana practice or yoga practice specific for anxiety and stress and overwhelm. We'll be talking about the great gut-brain connection, all that sort of stuff. And what's cool about it is that it's free for you to watch while the event is live. So my hope is to reach as many people as possible to connect them in with resources, because what works for me may not work for you, and that's okay. And I think this last piece of it was, the awareness that there's so many ways to approach this. And if it worked for your best friend and didn't work for you, it doesn't mean that you're broken. It just means it works for your best friend and isn't working for you. And so try a different tool, try a different approach, try a different style. For some people, hard exercise is the way, and for other people, Tai Chi is the only way that they can relax. So don't give up on yourself and just continue to try these different options until you find something that resonates with you. Too oftentimes I see people creating more stress and overwhelm in their life because this thing should be working by now, whatever that modality is. And if it's not a fit, it's not a fit, and that's okay. One piece I want to leave the practitioners with is there's actually a research article that came out probably close to 20 years ago now that said at this point, and this is again a couple of decades ago, there's enough literature out here to talk about mindfulness and its effectiveness across the board for any health issue you can possibly imagine, that at this point it is unethical to not incorporate mindfulness-based interventions in primary care. And so
very good point.
I just, but we have to start with ourselves. If we're not walking the walk, we cannot take anybody further than we've gone in the past. So this is my invitation to you to do a quick little inventory and see what you love and what lights you up and what you can let go of in order to make room for you.
That's a great place to end, Nicola. For those of you who didn't have a pen and paper handy, all of those kinds of email or website addresses and other links that Dr. Dehlinger mentioned will be in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining us and illuminating a little bit more about all the different practices that are available and making it a bit more accessible for not just our practitioners that are listening, but also for our patients. So Thank you for joining me.
It's really, truly my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the SIBO Doctor podcast. We hope you found the information in this episode useful in the treatment of your SIBO patients. Thanks to our sponsors, SIBOtest.com, a breath testing service with easy online ordering, and Quintron, maker of outstanding breath testing equipment. Tune in again for another episode of the SIBO Doctor podcast. Thanks again for listening.